Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to another live stream series here for Humane Canada Summit for Animals. It is a pleasure to be here with you this morning if you are on the West Coast, afternoon if you're on the East Coast, even probably evening if you're somewhere in Europe, Asia, somewhere else in the world. My name is Natalia Hansen, and I am the marketing coordinator for Humane Canada Summit for Animals, the largest animal welfare conference in our country, in Canada. Brings together about 400 people from all areas within the animal welfare space, sheltering, advocacy, academia, research. It's happening in Montreal, April 27th, 28th, and 29th. And guess what? Our conference is 75% sold out right now. So there's still a chance for you to secure your participation and join us in Montreal. So we are doing this live stream series because we want to introduce you, our viewers, who may be interested in coming to the conference, to our speakers. We have over 105 thought leaders who are presenting at this year's Summit for Animals. And we want to give you a sneak peek into their sessions. We have 10 educational topics this year, including shelter and community medicine. We have marketing, we have wild and farm animals, we have humane education, we have leadership. You can see everything on our website, humanecanada.ca/summit. So today we are going to be talking to someone who is very familiar and a friend of Humane Canada because she has had several roles in our organization. And this is Adrienne McBride. I'm going to bring her out in a minute, but first, let me tell you a little bit about her. Adrienne McBride has over a decade of experience in animal sheltering and welfare, with key contributions in Ontario and British Columbia. A former lawyer, Adrienne followed her passion for animals, serving as executive director of the Guelph Humane Society in Ontario, where she raised $10 million for a new shelter. She is now the senior director of community animal centers at the BC SPCA, overseeing 35 centers across the province. Adrienne has served on several boards, including Humane Canada and the Animal Welfare Foundation of Canada. She enjoys sharing her expertise through presentations, which is why she's coming to Montreal. Let's bring her out and say hello. Hi,
Hello,
Adrienne. How are
Natalia. Thanks
you?
for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you for joining us. I know you're just starting your day out there in BC, so good morning to you.
Yes, good
And
afternoon to
we
you.
will, yeah, I know, right? Good afternoon, good morning, good day. Let's just say good day. So, we are going to be talking about something called the vulnerable animal spectrum. And as I said in the intro, this is just a sneak peek that we are giving people. We don't want to give too much away. First, we don't have the time. Two, we want them to come to the conference and learn in person and hear from you on the subject and be able to ask you questions. So, how about we start by you giving us a brief overview of what this vulnerable animal spectrum is?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited. I'm excited to be coming to the conference to speak more fulsomely about it as well. This is going to be my 12th Humane Canada conference. And if you've never come before, I can't recommend the experience enough to connect with your colleagues across Canada and talk about topics like this that can have such huge impact on the way we help animals in Canada. And so with our vulnerable animal spectrum at the BCSPC, we really started this idea around when we were thinking about our new strategic plan, which we've just launched starting in 2025. And we wanted to think about how can we help animals that need us the most. And that's it's a very basic goal that I think organizations that are tuning in today, that are attending the conference, that are across Canada helping animals, that's what we want to do. We want to help the animals that need us the most. But the question becomes, how do we know that we're helping the animals that need us the most? How do we make sure we do that consistently every day, that we're helping the right animals at the right time? And so what we embarked on with our strategic plan was saying, what if we created a system? And so we've called it the vulnerable animal spectrum to help us establish which animals are the most vulnerable and which are less vulnerable, maybe still needing help, but help in different ways. And so we wanted to look at all of the ways we help animals and bring them together kind of under one umbrella with one system that talks that the systems all talk to each other as well, right? In all of our organizations, we have outreach programs, we have intake programs, we have foster programs, we have we might have protection or animal control programs, all these ways that we're helping animals. And do they work together in a system that makes sure we're there to help the animals that need us the most? And then helping animals isn't always bringing them into an animal shelter. It might be providing other programs, and do those programs talk to our intake programs at the same time? So really, it's about creating a system that's it's going to make sure we're serving the animals that need us the most.
Nice. And what it sounds like is like BCSPCA notice that there's maybe a gap even within the same organization from all these teams that you just mentioned, intake, protection, adoptions, etc. And maybe it's identifying those gaps and seeing, okay, how can we work cohesively? Because we may be missing opportunities to help animals. And as you know very well, when we help animals, we also help people, right? It goes hand in hand. So I know
Yeah.
we're going to talk about this as well and go into more detail at the conference at the Summit for Animals. And there are several sessions as well about it's really nice to see that it's not just now shelter medicine, but it's shelter and community medicine. It's gotten out of the shelter box and the shelter space to really go out into community, right? And partner with
Yeah.
community programs, etc., to have a more wholesome, fulsome approach.
Yeah.
So I understand, and I know you're going to talk about this more at the conference, but I understand that the vulnerable animal spectrum doesn't only account for companion animals. A lot of times when we think of animals, we think dogs and cats, let's be honest, right? Because those are what we tend to have. Maybe sometimes a bunny, maybe sometimes a bird. But this program or this initiative also considers farm, wild, and exotic species to some degrees, which I thought was really cool to expand to other species outside of the dogs and the cats. Can you share an example of how a farm, wild, or exotic animal has benefited from this model?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes back to the idea of making sure we're helping animals at the right time in the right way. And when we look at deciding to create a system that helps us identify which animals need our help, then when we started this project, we really did start just with cats and dogs, because it made the project seem a little bit easier and less daunting when we thought, okay, how do we help all animals all the time? And so we started with cats and dogs. But what our goal was to build a system that could then be translated into how do we help wild animals? How do we help farm animals? And really always trying to think outside of just intake. We can help as animal welfare organizations. We know we can help animals and their people in an infinite number of ways, none of which require them actually coming through the walls of the doors of our buildings and spending time sheltered in our buildings, which for many animals isn't the best option for them. And so when we look, for example, at wild animals in our community, they're going to be vulnerable animals in our community that are because we might have destroyed habitats where they live. And so understanding that creates a vulnerability in our community if we have deforested an area to build a subdivision, that we know there's going to be animals in that area that are more vulnerable right now in our community because they've lost habitat. And so being able to take that system and say, how do we again create a system so that when our teams, we don't have infinite resources. We wish we did, to help all the animals that needed us. How do we know that with the resources we have and the time and skills we have, that we're targeting animals that we can have the most impact on? And so understanding what creates vulnerability in our community is a really important aspect of the spectrum. So when we look at wild animals, there are things that create vulnerabilities for them. Most often it's human causes, where we've interrupted habitat, or we've have cats out in our community that's creating a vulnerability for fledgling birds. And so we know at that time of year, we're going to prioritize our efforts and our work around protecting fledgling birds, because the system that we work within is creating a vulnerability for them, particularly in urban habitats with high populations of cats that are free roaming. So the system is really about understanding where those vulnerabilities exist, and then how do we target our efforts to have the most amount of impact on the animals that we can help. because I think as animal welfare organizations, often our temptation is to want to help all the animals all the time. I mean, I'm just as guilty of that as many of my colleagues, right? I want to do everything, but recognizing we don't have the resources to do that. We'll never have the amount of impact we want to have if we're spreading ourselves too thin. And so creating a really objective, systematic way of really triaging the animals that need us, and then saying, this is where we're going to help, because we know we can have a lot of impact on these animals. And this is why we're perhaps not going to help this group of animals right now, because we've decided this other group needs us more. One example, it's domestic example, but I think it really highlights that difference is, stray animals. We have lots of ways that our organizations can help stray animals. And a lot of times when we look at traditional intake systems, we say, oh, stray animal need to come in to our facility. That's a very, sort of common response. We always help stray animals. Stray animals always come to our facility. But when I look at my own dogs that are microchipped, wearing visible identification, have a very dedicated owner, I assure you, that would, start searching for them the moment they went missing. If they were to go missing or lost and end up in an animal center, they're taking up a space that could otherwise be given to an animal that doesn't have, all of the identification or a dedicated owner, or, is experiencing some other type of vulnerability. Maybe they truly are abandoned or lost or injured. My dog doesn't need to take up that space in an animal center. So could we shift the way we look at, identified strays and make sure they're not taking up space and resources that we could use to serve animals that, truly are experiencing a vulnerability for various different reasons?
Wow, thank you so much for that answer. There are a couple of things that came to mind as you're talking. One, it sounds like a first point to start is to identify what vulnerability means. Because, for example, when I read about this and I read about the wild animals, farmed animal, exotic animal aspect, in my mind, I thought, okay, maybe a raccoon was hit by a car. Like that was the extent of what I thought. I didn't consider what you just said. When we're building, for example, and we're cutting down trees and we are removing their habitat, that makes them vulnerable. I thought, oh, you're right. Human wildlife conflict. I never thought of that. That makes them vulnerable. I never thought of that. So that's one thing. Um, the other thing as well that I was going to say is how can, for example, what you just said in your the case of your dog, knock on wood, let's say your dog gets
Yeah.
lost, but your dog has a microchip tag, etc. Instead of putting your dog into the shelter and taking up that space, where would it ideally go? Is there a foster home? Is there like a temporary holding space while the owner is located?
Yeah, and I think there's lots of different ways to answer that question, and a lot of it sometimes is community specific. Where I am, there is a municipal dog control, and so that's where my dog would likely end up if she went missing, if I couldn't get to her in time. And that's a great option. It doesn't have to be the Humane Society or the SPCA or the rescue organization that rushes in to help. That we can, as advocates for animals, ensure communities have robust municipal systems that support stray animals. It doesn't need to be the organizations that are, here to protect vulnerable animals necessarily intervening. So I mean, that's in my ideal world, that would be, every municipality would be investing in their systems to help reunite stray animals in their communities. I think, really creating systems that empower, like you said, community-based returning animals to owners. So, if we can, social media is a great tool for that. And we've seen lots of great examples of the animal can be get it posted online quickly. Often that reunites owner and animal really quickly. And then it never needed to come into the animal center. Certainly creating, finder fosters is a great program, especially for cats, where perhaps the person who's found that cat might be able to keep the cat safe for a couple of days while they do canvass their neighbors, especially if it's a healthy outdoor, stray cat. Canvass your neighbors, look for an owner for that animal. So programs where we can just delay that intake a little bit in a way that might actually lead to a better outcome for that animal than if it came in and perhaps had a really stressful experience in an animal shelter.
Yeah, it sounds like the goal is to try to keep them out of the shelter as much as possible because, like you said, it could be stressful for them. There is a comment here on Instagram from Cassie. She's in Vancouver. And she says, how can we ask our cities to keep more green space rather than clear cut forests for new developments? For example, in Langley, which is in BC.
Mhm.
I can't show it on the screen for some reason, sorry, but that was her question.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, beyond just the vulnerable animal spectrum, I think Humane Canada's done some incredible work around creating that One Health and connecting that, the actions that we take in our environment impact our animals, impact our people. People benefit from forests as well. And so really making sure
Of
we're building
course.
those connections and understanding how, those actions can impact each other. And then they can create vulnerabilities for people and animals, and then what's the greater impact that has when we create those vulnerabilities in our community.
Thank you. Thank you for that. There's another comment on LinkedIn from Kathy Duncan from Humane Canada. She says so important to have these systems talking to each other. She's going back to what we were saying at the
Yeah,
beginning.
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
agree.
And I think that's,
Absolutely.
for me, really was almost like a light bulb moment as I worked on this project, is how we think our systems talk to each other. And I think we all probably are guilty of that, of thinking, of course, they talk to each other. But do they
Yeah.
really talk to each other? Are they really integrated? Are the criteria that our officers use when they're out in the field doing, animal control or protection work, is the criteria they use to decide whether an animal gets to, a surrendered animal comes into care, is that the same criteria exactly that our intake coordinators are using when they're on the phone arranging owner surrender, or when our outreach team is deciding to facilitate an intake through an outreach program? Is the criteria the same? Is everybody talking the same language? Is everybody really understanding that, using, we said they're finite resources. If we only have 12 dog kennels in our animal center, and 12 people all want those spots, it makes it really difficult to make sure that you're consistent across the board, to say, is everyone using the same criteria and making the same decisions about animals that get helped today, or does another animal maybe need to wait a bit longer, or can we help them in a completely different way? Would a food bank program and a spay neuter program, and access to resources to help support positive reinforcement training, would that make all the difference, so that animal actually never needs to come into our care, and we can support them differently?
Love that. And I think that ties in with what you were saying at the beginning. We want to help them all. You said, I'm guilty of that. I raised my hand because me too. And I think a lot of people watching right now may feel the same, but it's important to be able to know when we can, we have to say no, or we have to say, not that way. Let's help this animal this way instead, not the way you thought. So it's important to be flexible with that.
And that's
There's
such
a
a
comment
key
on
point, right? Is to be able
yeah.
to, I can't help you that way, but I want to help you this way, and here's why. And build that in our community, that we're not the answer is not always to bring the animal through the doors. There's so many other ways that we can help animals, and in a way that actually helps them thrive where they are, and with the human that already loves them in many cases.
Yeah, exactly. In many cases, like you said, yeah, the goal is to support the human animal bond when it is there. Absolutely. So there was a comment that I highlighted here on LinkedIn that says that One Health and One Welfare truly does show the interconnectedness of humans, the environment, and animals, and shows it sounds like the vulnerable animal spectrum is a perfect example of the One Health, One Welfare model. So thank you. And are there any stakeholders, Adrian, that are involved in the spectrum? For example, social workers? Are there any food banks?
Yeah. So what our process was really consult. Is that the right consult? I'm not going to even try that word while we're live. I did
Consultant.
a lot of consultation as part of this project, because I wanted to look at, what's everybody else doing. I don't want to reinvent the wheel, but can we make the wheel better? Was always my, my goal when I attack these type of challenges. So, you know, I went as far as to talk to our friends at the RSPCA in Australia, a variety of different colleagues, you know, across North America, asking the question, what do you do? How do you solve this problem? To really gather as much information as we can from as many colleagues as we can. And then I thought, well, you know, there's other organizations out there that aren't thinking about animals at all, that are looking at ways that they can, you know, help as many people as they can efficiently. And so I really tried to look at what are other industries doing, whether they are human service industries or other sectors. How do they solve that problem of lots of people need our help? How do we help them the right way? And so one area that I spent a lot of time looking at was looking at how the health system triages, particularly in an emergency context. So when you go to the emergency department, we've all had that experience. We know we're going to get triaged. We know we're going to have to wait, depending on the severity of our injury, or you know, our illness. Some people are going to get bumped ahead of us. Some people are going to have to wait longer than us. And we understand that system really well as people. And so I thought, well, what if we could look at some of the principles that are used in a human triage system to look at how do we apply that to our vulnerable animal spectrum. And the triage system is a language that, you know, our clients in the animal welfare sector, they would understand because they've probably accessed it through our healthcare system. And so we really started to look at that system and that understanding. How do they decide who gets to go first? And there's a lot of really interesting learnings that come out of it. And I think one of the most important learnings that I took out of interviewing and researching how emergency rooms work was the idea that the system has to be unbiased and have no judgment. And I think that's something that as animal welfare professionals, we can learn from and we can embrace, and we can remind ourselves, even though we already know it, we can remind ourselves again that when we are looking at creating a vulnerable animal spectrum or a triage system, we have to make sure there's no bias, there's no judgment, that we are, you know, interacting with the people coming to us looking for help. At that level, we're not coming with any preconceived ideas of why they need to surrender their animal or what they could have done differently, you know, a week ago, or how they found themselves in that situation, or why, if they found a stray dog, they're not willing to go the distance to try to help find its owner. We have to make sure we're coming to those scenarios very, very neutral, very unbiased, and that's going to end up allowing us to help that animal better in the long run.
Wow. Yeah, that's important to remember, of course, to try and remain as unbiased, as neutral as possible, and just think like, this is where we're at. Sure, maybe you're still going to think about it like, oh, they could have done this, they should have done that, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. All you have is the present right now and how you can help that animal and that person and that community moving forward, the end. And just take a deep breath and move on and do what's right for the animal. I agree. Thank you for reminding us of that. And we're almost at the end. And like I said again at the beginning, we don't want to give too much away, but I know participants in your session will learn how to develop their own vulnerable animal spectrum, which is, again, one of the beautiful things about joining the conference, coming to the Summit for Animals, is you learn how other organizations or other people are doing things, in this case, the BC SPCA, and you can apply it for your own organization, for your own humane society, shelter, SPCA, etc. So can you share one step or tip that they can implement to get started?
Yes, absolutely. And I encourage everyone to consider coming to the conference, because then you get to learn, exactly as Natalia said, how to develop your own spectrum. But I think one thing that I would want, if you can't come, start thinking about, like we talked about earlier, are your systems talking to each other? Are they using the same criteria? You know, that evaluation just in and of itself, I think, can be really informative. And the other piece is really starting to think about your triage system. And, you know, Dr. Kate Hurley wrote a really great article that came out kind of towards the end of the pandemic. And I think it got lost in the conversation because we were all focused on coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we saw the intake numbers for animal centers were soaring. She wrote an article called The Evolving Role of Triage in Animal Sheltering. And it's a great article that gets you to start thinking about, are we using that type of system when we're thinking about even just managed intake still requires an element of triage? Are we thinking about the person that's involved in the situation as well as the animal? And are we, thinking about all those factors, not just do I have space in my animal shelter? And so really that's where I would challenge is start thinking about it, just think about it, things a little bit differently and see if that those tweaks in your system can help you more effectively deliver the services to the animals that need it the most.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And there's a comment here, which I'm pretty sure it's from Kathy at Humane Canada, and says, so interesting to hear about the comparison of to healthcare of people, like what you just said, and you made it easy, as you were saying in your response before, by using the word triage, because most of us have had an experience at the emergency room, whether for ourselves or our family, friends, children, etc. So we understand that, and I think it's important to use words that don't alienate people, but that people understand. For example, the concept of food bank, we just added the word pet food bank, and then people understand what that is, right? And it's important to from a marketing perspective, I guess, or a promotional communications perspective, to speak the language that people understand. Sometimes we get, sorry, so caught up in jargon and fancy words. And no, let's break it down. Let's make it easy. You know what I mean? Like, I know the academic terms sound fancy and great, but we need to really get to the people in ways that they can understand and they will feel safe and supported and not feel like they're going to take my animal away. They're going to punish me. No. Let's help. Let us help you. And this is how we can do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think all of that at the end of the day too will help our organizations when we face those customer service, crisis, negative media crisis. It's often the criticism of our organizations is often because you didn't help, and the community felt you should have helped, and that to me is like that's an opportunity for us to say. Here's how we can help. Here's why we want to help. Here's what we can offer. And if we can't help, we also, this system, if we're objective in our system, develops a way for us to say, and here's why I can't help, and be really clear and consistent in the ways that we can't sometimes help because we know we can't help in every situation.
Yeah, exactly. Just going back to understanding that that is the reality. I had a chat with Dr. Quan Stewart, who is going to be the keynote speaker at our conference. Very, very excited to see him speak live. He has done fantastic work in the United States. And he said, you can't help them all. You have to start by, in his case, he focuses a lot on dogs. So he said, you start by helping one dog at a time. That's it. Because otherwise it's just overwhelming and then compassion fatigue kicks in, burnout, and that's not what we want. Like we can't pour from an empty cup, as cliche as that sounds, but it is the truth, honestly, truthfully. Adrian, I am so happy to have chatted with you. Thank you so much because you gave a lot away. Caitlin Mills here was saying that she can't wait and she's looking forward to learning more at the conference.
Good.
And this is an important topic. So thank you, Caitlin, for your comment. So from you're a speaker, but from an attendee perspective, because you're also attending, is there anything in particular that you're excited about at the Summit for Animals in Montreal this April?
Oh, you know what? I think the best parts for me is I come away from the conferences so inspired to go back and, to think about things a little bit differently, or what can we do to just do things a little bit better. I'm always so inspired. And I think looking at the agenda for this year, it's going to be no different than it has for the last 12 years that I've been going.
Yes, exciting. That's true. And you can read up on all of our sessions. We have 105 plus speakers. We
Incredible.
have over 55 sessions. There are a lot of educational opportunities, networking opportunities as well, because the Summit for Animals really goes beyond sitting in some lectures and then you're done and that's it. No, it's about conversations, it's about relationship building, it's about networking, it's about exchanging ideas, information. So go to the website, it's humanecanada.ca/summit is showing here on the screen, and you can learn more about Adrienne. The bio that I set up about her at the beginning was this much because she has quite an impressive career, and I just have to condense it. So you can read more about her and about all of our speakers. And remember, I'm not saying this to scare you all who are watching, but conference is 75% sold out. So really make sure that you secure your participation and register humanecanada.ca/summit. Thank you so much, Adrienne. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you for joining us bright and early from BC. And thank you to everybody who watched live and those who are watching the replay. I hope you enjoy it. And last thing, I'm just going to show the website here where you can learn more about BC SPCA's Vulnerable Animals Spectrum as part of their strategic plan. So the website's right here on the screen, and stay connected with them as well because BC SPCA is one of our sponsors as well for this year's conference. So looking forward to seeing you. Any closing words?
Oh, thank you so much, Natalia. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk. I'm really excited to present more like fulsomely on this topic at the conference. And if anyone watching today or watching the recording wants to connect, I love connecting with my colleagues across the world about topics like this because I think the more we share, the more we learn, and the better we can do for animals. So please reach out. I'm happy to connect, and I look forward to
Thank
seeing
you.
you in Montreal.
Yes, see you soon in less than 2 months or about 2 months. Woohoo, let's do it. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe and have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.
Bye.